Welcome everybody to our MBY Radio Island Housing Crisis panel number 2. It's our discussion on the island housing crisis. It's a nice day today. We thought we would play that wonderful song, Here Comes the Sun. And so before we get started here, I would like to recognize Polly Bellin-Wilson, who's going to be our interpreter this evening from Brazilian Portuguese interpretation. That's what she's going to be providing tonight, thanks to the Community Ambassador Partnership. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little globe. You can click on the globe and choose Brazilian Portuguese. You can choose her as your interpreter for the evening and listen to this in Brazilian Portuguese. So Polly, thank you so much for being here tonight to do this.
You are welcome. Thank you.
And so if you'd like to welcome our Brazilian Portuguese community and invite them to your channel, that would be great.
Ok, vamos lá. Quem está aqui em português pode clicar no globo, que está logo abaixo. Vocês vão clicar no globo e escolher a língua portuguesa para poderem continuar me ouvindo. Então, tudo que for falado aqui, vocês vão continuar ouvindo no canal em português. Laurel, it's back to you.
Thank you so much, Polly. So welcome tonight to our panel, to our second panel, as I just mentioned. But before we get started, I'd also like to read a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land where we live. It is the ancestral homeland of the Wampanoag tribe, the first island community and caretakers of Noepe. We acknowledge that the land and the First Nation people are one and the same and cannot be divided. So thank you very, very much. There's been some questions about this too, so I just want to bring it up. If this is your first Zoom webinar experience, no one can see or hear you as an attendee. However, I would like to make it very clear that your voice is very important and we want to hear that. So this entire series is to help us all become informed so that each and every question that you might have from all perspectives and all opinions is encouraged here tonight. So please leave all your questions in the chat. And my co-captain, who I'm going to recognize right now, Jess Spaniff, who's, spotlight yourself up there. She is going to be keeping an eye on the chat and say hi.
Hello.
Jess is going to be the one who's going to pipe in every now and then when you have your questions and make sure that we recognize your question and get that into the conversation as well. So thank you so much for doing that, Jess. All right, so our impact tonight, our conversation tonight is going to be centering around the impact our island economy, the housing crisis is having on our island economy, businesses, small businesses, large businesses, private and in the public sector, and also discussing with our housing bank representatives here tonight, what happens if it passes? What happens if it doesn't pass? Getting a lot more information about how the housing bank can help. And I'd like to start out by saying, having each panelist talk briefly about the perspective that they're bringing to the table tonight. For instance, Denise Shapisi, I'd like to start with you, who's the CEO of the Martha's Vineyard Hospital, and how this housing crisis is impacting the hospital and what you're seeing from both sides of things.
Thank you, Laurel, and thank you, MBY Radio, for hosting this very important topic. And from the hospital's perspective, I'd like to think of the MB Hospital as one of the anchor institutions on this island. It was founded in 1921. And here we are 100 years later, we take care of everybody that comes to us 24/7, 365 days a year. We're also the largest employer on Martha's Vineyard. And as a business where our healthcare mission touches everyone, being able to recruit and retain talented and a stable workforce is mission critical to us. Finding housing for our year-round employees has always been a challenge, especially during the summer months. But now it's become the #1 impediment to recruitment and retention. With the housing market upended by the pandemic, the year-round population increasing and affordable housing, workforce housing bottoming out, we're headed for the perfect storm. With population growth and growing more rapidly in the greater than age 65 sector, so grows the demand for more healthcare. And to provide more healthcare, we need more people. It's that simple. Let me put this in context for you in terms of numbers. We currently have approximately 480 employees, including travel staff at the hospital in Windermere. And right now we have 98 vacancies or open positions, which includes nurses, certified nursing assistants, housekeepers, many technical positions, maintenance workers, people from every sector of the team that keep the clocks here running on time. This doesn't include physicians. During the month of January alone, 15 employees left us due to housing, and 19 employment offers were rejected due to housing. It takes us roughly 70 days from posting to filling a position, and our busiest months of the year are right around the corner. We are currently onboarding 17 travelers and have open requisitions of an additional 15 to round out our summer needs. You start to see the picture. Currently, the hospital maintains an inventory of about 90 bedrooms, mostly leased and a few owned, but it's just not enough to meet our current need. Purchasing a home for the average worker is nearly impossible and jeopardizes the stability of our workforce going forward into the future. Martha's Vineyard Hospital Windermere offers stable and good employment for many islanders and a growing number of those coming from the mainland to work here. The Martha's Vineyard Hospital median income is for annual earnings is at $81,000 a year, plus fringe benefits. The 2020 area median income in comparison is $64,000. To put this in perspective from a housing standpoint, a Martha's Vineyard Hospital median employee can afford a mortgage of about $400,000 and a monthly rent of $2,000. We all know what the published real estate data is showing us, that the median housing cost right now is 1.3, and the average rent is $2,900. Our housing expenses have increased, so our housing program that we have these 90 bedrooms was costing us about $2 million annually. We now have 30 less bedrooms and our costs are up to $3 million. Now I think you can see why I call it the perfect storm coming. We do have solutions, which is to build our own workforce housing and plans in the making. However, it just can't happen fast enough to meet the needs we have right now. To provide the best healthcare our community needs and deserves, we need great people. And people need affordable housing. It's indeed mission critical.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you so much. This I would like to bring Chief Nelson Wirtz right now. He's the chief of the Oak Bluffs Police Department, and he has decades of experience on the Cape of working on the front lines of a lot of serious situations. And Chief, you have your own story about housing. So I'd love for you to share that and also what you're seeing and how hard it is to keep people.
I can do that. I am the fire chief, not the police chief.
Yeah, sorry. Excuse me, Chief Nelson.
Yeah.
The Oak Bluffs Fire Department.
You don't want me as the police chief. No, so I come at this crisis. First of all, I'd like to mirror a lot of what Denise was saying. We're coming up against very similar things. We, as far as employees leaving to go off island because of housing, because of economics, and also in recruitment and retention. You know, we do have age limitations for our volunteers and for many of our full-time staff. And as she mentioned, you know, the average age is moving up over 65. And unfortunately, that's right around our cutoff. But my personal story is that I come here from the Cape. I've been on the Cape for 35 years. And so newly arrived back in May of 2021. And the two perspectives I bring is, one, someone who is searching for housing, reasonable housing, and also as someone who is running a public safety department that is dependent upon professionals, volunteers, and much of my staff, some of my staff comes in from off island. And as you know, it's weather dependent sometimes. And those small things that may seem small, like, oh, you can't get over here because the wind is blowing too hard or there's a storm coming, that costs me overtime because now I have to pay somebody else to be in the position. And so, even these, seemingly innocent things end up costing an additional money to the citizens of the Vineyard. And certainly housing is playing a huge part in that. Not being able to keep staff, and with the rising cost of training, education, and equipment, it makes it even more difficult. So
we'll get to your story then, because Greg, also you have a perspective coming from growing up here. And you're also the president of the Chamber of Commerce, so you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening with businesses.
It's I was born here. I graduated Edgartown Elementary School. Please don't everybody share it once. The regional high school, and at the time I graduated from high school, my parents had what in 1969 was the talk, which was, you're never going to make any money down here. You're never going to, be able to buy a house down here. You've got to go away. So I went away to college, got married, worked in broadcasting in Boston for almost 30 years. My only exposure back to the island was coming back for vacations. When I left the island to go away to college, you could always get a rental. I remember tradespeople being able to cut deals with summer homeowners. And the deal was, I'll live rent free and I'll repair all this stuff in your house. And they would live in these beautiful homes for absolutely nothing. I came back to the island in 2001 to be the general manager of WMBY. And I thought everything was the same as 1969. It wasn't. Things were tough to hire people from off island. There were not a lot of affordable rentals, but there were some. There were some to be found, but not a lot. Fast forward 17 years, I'm now the, not 17 years, I am now on the board of directors, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm also executive director of Habitat for Humanity. And I've seen just in the last 3 years, a dramatic, not erosion, a disappearing of affordable houses. In my role through the Chamber of Commerce, we act as a clearinghouse for local businesses that want to move and set up shop on the island, for people who are looking for jobs and looking for places to live. If you go to our website, you'll see a listing of jobs. It's about 2 pages long. When you go to our listing for places to live, there's one, just one. And we can't seem to get to many more. Our job at the Chamber of Commerce is to help to support the economic health of Martha's Vineyard. It's difficult to support the health of our members when they can't hire enough people to work in their businesses such that people live down here. It got to a point last year where we actually published online for our members a little sign that we asked them to put in the windows, which was, please be patient, we're having a labor shortage. And we can't wait on you as quickly as we would like to, serve you as quickly as we'd like to. And over the course of the summer, you would anecdotal things of people coming in, having to wait too long. And it was tough if you worked in retail. I think it was tough if you worked anywhere, but housing definitely impacted that.
Well, Greg, you bring up a lot of points I'm sure Larkin Stallings understands as the president of the Oak Bluffs Association and an owner of the Ritz on Circuit Avenue in Oak Bluffs. So Larkin, I welcome you to unmute yourself and share your perspective.
Laurel, thank you so much. And thank you to MBY Radio. much of what has already been said, it directly affects every small business on Martha's Vineyard. We at the OBA, we represent 52 plus businesses in the Oak Bluffs area. Most of them small businesses, actually all of them are small. I think the largest one, we do actually represent the YMCA as well, but that's a whole nother story. But I sent out a letter after you invited me on this panel, and actually Julie invited me on this panel, and I sent out a letter to the members asking, were they seeing this as a problem? What was their, take on both the workforce issue and how it's affected by the what we'll call a housing crisis? And an overwhelming response. We spent all night if I went through every letter I received back. Overwhelmingly, the number one concern for this season is staffing, and the number one concern to staffing is housing. It is, and this is about economics, this particular forum, and how does that affect us economically? Well, everyone I spoke to via email and in person said that the only solutions they can see is, one, be open less. And in a summer like this summer, where every hotel is booked and every Airbnb is booked, the idea of closing your doors when we make very little to nothing in the wintertime, this is harvest time. This is when we make what supports us throughout the year. To have to say, okay, I'm going to close for 2 days because I don't have the staff to open. I'm going to close. I'm not going to open days. I'm only open evenings because I don't have the staff to open. Or I'm only open, whatever. And the reality is that these folks all of them are good at what they do. They work really hard, right? We all do. And the idea of not being able to do what we do well, simply because it's an impossibility to get folks on board from a personal standpoint. My wife and I have had the risk now for 6-7 years. And our first couple of years staffing up was difficult, but not impossible. And we were at about 100% staffed for the first couple of years, right up into the pandemic. During the pandemic, we went out to, we were not able to get housing for our staff. Our staff was able, I had employees living in tents and, sleeping 3 to a room and all that sort of stuff. So my wife and I decided we would go out and look for a house to purchase for employee housing, right? And we were unable to, and we were in the 800 to $1.2 million range is what we figured we could afford. We were not able to buy a single thing. I think my realtor's on this, is actually listening right now, and she could attest the fact we looked at, I don't know how many places we looked at and could not find a single one. They were bought out from under us with sight unseen. They're about, hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking. And we walked away from the process really disappointed because we were unable, we now supply housing for 2 of our employees, but that's it. So anyway, it's a tough one. I really feel hard. I feel most badly about the new members of our business community that are just getting in now, and we'll get into some of the particulars later on down the road. But it's a big one, and this is, like I think it's been said before. We're at a tipping point here, and I see it's a now or never thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Larkin. And David Vigneau, who is the executive director of the Dukes County Regional Housing Authority, you have been seeing a lot of people coming to you with jobs, and you have to turn them away. Tell me, what are you experiencing over there?
Well, boy, everything that's been said cues a bunch of answers to that question, Laurel. And, last week when we were discussing tonight's session, I was sort of the bumper sticker guy saying, we've been saying for a while, no housing, no servers, no service economy, basically. And we've certainly heard about that from Larkin and the smaller business owners to Denise, the largest employer on the island. It's true throughout. And certainly last summer, Larkin would agree, help wanted signs up in every window during the summer season is a really bad sign. And things have only gotten worse since then. We all know the factors. our neighbors who moved into their summer homes from other places around the country, Airbnb, short-term rentals, what's been becoming a trickle for 30 odd years, as Greg spoke of it well, is the spigot was turned off basically in the last year or so, to the point of no listings in the chamber site. We have our ear to the ground on everything. And in fact, we've been running a COVID rental relief program for a couple of years, assisting with months to 3 months of rent through the very generous efforts of the MV Community Foundation. And so we speak with a lot of landlords and their tenants. And I will say, with the COVID rental relief and the rental assistance program we've been running for a while, better than 20 years, we have over 120, 100 and probably closer to 150 landlords that we're in touch who are renting year round, which is amazing when you think about it, right? Because every one of them could play this market the way so many are and could be getting an awful lot more money, basically. And they're choosing not to for the various reasons that one does, but mostly it's about loyalty to either individuals and their families, or to the idea that working people on the island need a place to live. They did when they made their stand, or if they're multi-generational, they've watched their children, to Greg's point about the lecture he got, not be able to stay here, their grandchildren and what have you. So what we're seeing is a level of desperation, Laurel, on top of the very simple practical fact of individuals and their families needing a roof over their head to stay in our community. I fear when as the dust is settling from the COVID period, I think everybody on this call and everybody listening can tell you about a shop counter or a restaurant or any number of services that they could walk into, and they know people who were here 3 years ago that aren't here now, whose families were here for years, decades, generations, who aren't here now. And that exodus hasn't stopped. So it is the other bumper sticker. I think Larkin and employers would agree that any island business that doesn't have housing as part of its business plan doesn't have a practical or sustainable business plan at this point.
Yeah, and David, Ariel in the chat echoed what you and Larkin were just saying, that every restaurant owner that she's encountered says the very same exact thing, every last one. So Julie Fay, who is the chair of the CCMVHB board, and Laura Silver, who is the coordinator for the coalition to create a Martha's Vineyard Housing Bank. It brings us to the two of you who can speak about how the housing bank, how can they help? How can a housing bank help? Either one can unmute and.
I'm unmuted. Julie, do you want to take that one, or would you like me to start?
I'll get started and then you can jump in, Laura.
Okay, sure.
Laurel, thanks so much to NBY Radio for hosting this series. Before we go to the housing bank in particular, I'd just like to add a little color to what Nelson and Larkin and Denise and the others have been talking about with respect to access to services and the financial implications of the housing crisis. Those are all very, very true. But one of the things that is probably less apparent, but just as important and just as heart-wrenching, is the human aspect of it. I ran MV Community Services for 8 years before I retired in 2020. And one of the things that I found most difficult was holding on to counseling staff and staff who were working with islanders who were vulnerable. You know, when you come for services at MV Community Services, for most of those services, you're really approaching the agency at one of your most vulnerable periods in your life. And we had wonderful counseling staff, wonderful rape counselors who worked with folks who had been victims of sexual violence and whatnot. Folks who were working with kids in the child care center, you know, people who are really making a difference in the lives of islanders and their families. And to lose a counselor, you think about the fact that they have 60 people on their caseload. They formed clinical relationships with these individuals, worked on some of the most difficult and private issues that they are facing in their lives with that counselor, and to have the counselor have to pull up stakes and move off island. You think of the number of people on that caseload who get turned over to somebody else and start the process all over again. And that's really, that kind of human impact is something I always found really heart-wrenching and very, very difficult. So on top of all the economic and access issues that have been really targeted here, I think that what it really means for individuals is just as important. You multiply that, those counselors and childcare workers times special ed teachers, school nurses, guidance counselors, you know, nurse practitioners who you're working through some of your most private circumstances with. To lose those absolutely important people in your life to a housing crisis is just unconscionable. So I will get off my soapbox with that and turn it over to Laura, who can start the housing bank aspect.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Laurel. Thanks, Julie, for getting that started. So the Coalition to Create the Martha's Vineyard Housing Bank, what we've done is we've been researching and working for the last 15 months on solutions to this ever worsening problem. We've looked at models all across the United States that includes Tahoe, Aspen, Crested Butte, programs in Hawaii and Maine, programs in the San Francisco Bay Area, programs up and down the Eastern Seaboard. David's been a very big part of that research project. So David, I want to thank you for your support and participation in that too. So what the housing bank would do is actually identify a new revenue stream, a previously non-existent revenue stream. There would be a transfer fee on real estate transactions over $1 million. No dollar under $1 million would be subject to this fee. This is a large conversation that's going on across the state. You might have seen in the news that Boston, there's been a lot of press on Boston filing for a transfer fee. Mayor Wu, this is her #1 priority for her administration this year. So we've calculated that a 2% transfer fee on sales over $1 million will bring the Vineyard community approximately $12 million annually. And that's funding that goes direct to this community. It does not go to the state to then be dispersed to this community. It comes straight to Martha's Vineyard to be managed by the island and decide the best ways to use that money to address the housing crisis. So the mechanism we would like to use to do this would be an island-wide housing bank, which greatly reduces the administrative costs that would be incurred if each individual town were to opt into a transfer fee on its own. You would then have to build 6 separate administrative apparatuses to administer the fee and administer the programs. This way, much like the Dukes County Regional Housing Authority, which serves all the towns on the island for income screening and monitoring of properties and management, an island-wide housing bank would serve as the administrative apparatus for funding for this $12 million per year. And it would serve the towns, affordable housing committee projects. It could serve individuals on the island through grant, loan, and down payment assistance programs, septic system upgrades to non-polluting nitrogen mitigation systems, and a number of other really creative solutions that we've researched that are happening all across the country.
Can you elaborate on that $1 million mark? Since there's been a lot of people asking about, why that level?
Yeah, so I want to be clear, this is different. This is different in operation from the land bank when it comes to that threshold. With the land bank, we're all used to, there's a first-time home buyer exemption. But if you're not a first-time home buyer, the fee's levied from the first dollar up. This does not work that way. The conversation across the state is that a threshold needs to be set. At state level, it would be set by the legislature at state median home price, which is $530,000 right now. On the Vineyard, we'd be looking at a higher threshold, closer to our median home price. We settled on $1 million, which aligns with one of the statewide pieces of legislation. In all reality, this process is going to take a minimum of 1 to 2 years, even after the votes happen at town meeting and town elections, if this passes. By the time we get to the point where we're actually implementing a housing bank here, the housing bank, elected housing bank commissioners are tasked and they're mandated to review that threshold and set it the appropriate rate for the current existing market conditions. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes perfect sense. And you also just alluded to the fact that even if the housing bank passed this year, there's still time built in. What happens, because we've all been talking, every panelist tonight has expressed the need for this to happen now, for that we're at a tipping point, and waiting could cause, what would holding off on a housing bank do?
I think David's on the front lines of this every day. He's the one who, when a school teacher gets a contract and comes to him and says, I've got a contract for a job, I need housing, and he has to say, we have no housing. So I think David would really be the one to speak to this. Like, what happens if, A, if it doesn't pass, and B, we're really looking at a minimum of 2 years, even if this passes and goes through the legislative process before we have access to dispersing any funds.
Well, what I would add, thank you, Laura, the tipping point that we're all referring to, we've passed that, right? We've tipped, as it were. And we're talking about preservation. And to Julie's point, this is about people preservation, really. It's about our community. We've been speaking, because that's tonight's theme, about the economy. You can't decouple those things, right? The people who get on the boat to come here to work, who, as the chief pointed out, are essential. Every business, every organization, every entity on the island are then getting back on the boat and going home to their communities and coaching youth sports and being members of their churches, volunteering, and so that drain is certainly it's 1A, 1B. The economy, the community, they're the same. And to the point of the housing bank, the funding stream dedicated to housing is a huge plank, along with land, whether it be redevelopment or development, and frankly, political will to really address the problem at the scale that it needs to be addressed. The funding stream is an essential component. And to Laura's very good point about local control, this is the point. We're a tax surplus county. We send way more tax revenue into the general fund of the state than we get back in services. And our organization's letter of support to Laura pointed that out to the legislatures. This is good for the Vineyard economy. It's also necessary for the state. And therefore their support of our efforts But we're now back to our efforts, aren't we? That's the big push right now. And, you know, I have wonderful associates and friends in these efforts over many years who might make the point, as was made last week, that echoing an early Julian Sear comment at one of the coalition meetings, right? That we're, you know, he's trying to muster support and we're leaving money on the table. We have towns who aren't at the 6% on the short-term rental. And the point was made last week, look at all of this money that has been coming in. And my point would be not $1 that I know of all of that short-term rental fee has gone into housing at this point. So we need a fund dedicated for housing. And we need it, you know, yesterday, basically.
Bringing up that demonstrates the urgency of the situation. But you know, as we're talking about economy and people are part of this economy, and it changes the whole island. I want to ask Denise and Chief Wirtz that, you know, what happens in a situation that we're in right now if, say, a housing bank doesn't pass? What happens to our ability to respond in the future to serious situations, to life-threatening situations?
Do you want me to take a crack at that, Chief? Well, you know, we'll never turn a patient away from our emergency room. We can't, you know, but that doesn't mean we might have to ratchet back certain services that are more elective. We're trying to build services here so that patients don't have to leave the island. They don't have to go off island and pay a round trip ferry ticket, take a day off from work to get some basic specialty care. We want to do that here for the community, but emergencies will always come first. And so I will have to redeploy staff to where they're needed most. And we'll be doing that shuffle just like we did during the pandemic. This is a different kind of crisis. It's a different kind of pandemic, if you will. And it does affect everybody's health. And I don't just mean the health of the hospital and its employees, but I mean the literal health. When there's housing instability, when there are young children that have to leave their homes and be uprooted during the summer months because of a rental, these children, you know, this is very disruptive to their health, and we see it in behavioral health. Claire Seguin, our CNO, talked about that last time, about the social determinants and the impacts of food insecurity and housing insecurity on health of our islanders. And it's heartbreaking, quite frankly. When you see a 12-year-old in our emergency room who's really strung out because, you know, the parents don't have a place to live, it's pretty heartbreaking.
And when you don't have staff, you know, Chief Wirtz, you were talking about, you know, retaining staff. You yourself having had a tough time securing any kind of a rental. If there's a fire, you have how much staff to respond to that fire? Could that be affected in the future?
Absolutely. And to, again, piggyback on what Denise was saying, is that, you know, the fire department and EMS department, we respond to 100% of the calls for service that we are asked to respond to. And, you know, that's our job. And it's also our responsibility. The issue does come in is, you know, the second or third call in a row. Where are those emergency providers coming from? Because there isn't backup staffing. So now, you know, depending upon, you know, how many ambulances are heading over toward Denise, you know, the next ambulance that's available might be coming from West Tisbury. And you're going to wait. Somebody's going to get there, but you're going to wait. And the same thing goes for fires. The national standard is four firefighters on a fire truck responding to a fire. That is what a crew is supposed to be. We are often at 2, which is every rubric is unacceptable. But we have to go. And so, every call is going to be answered. It's a matter of how many people are going to get there and how much work has to be done by the fewer people when they get there. Everything on a fire ground that has to get done, whether you show up with 8 people or you show up with 2. So
that's a huge neon sign for the need that we have right now. And Larkin and Greg, as from the business standpoint, I mean, we are here on this island. As you both have spoken about, small businesses, people come here to visit, and there are these small businesses that are going to suffer. What does the summer look like now if this housing bank doesn't pass? I mean, will our whole entire island change? Will it even?
I think it's changed already to some extent, Will.
Will we even be able to have any kind of a year-round population? I mean, working and living here to support it.
Larkin,
okay, go. That is the question, and I think that's the decision that we'll have to make as a community, is what kind of community do we want? Because the reality is that we will lose some of, we have already decided as a community, we don't want a Starbucks, right? We don't want a McDonald's. We don't want a Costco, right? So these are the things that we've decided that we don't want, right? And do we want small businesses? Do we want the mom and pops? I was talking to Hal and Aaron Reiser that have I'm mispronouncing his last name. Good friends don't know their last name. Hal and Aaron, who own this Sweet Life. They just bought Sweet Life, the building. They're, what a great couple. They own their own business. They're fired up. They're ready to go. They're good at what they do. If you haven't been to Sweet Life, go. They're a fantastic chef, great service, and they're up against it right now. They have they are not going to be able to open 7 days a week, which they need to pay the mortgage on both their home and their new business. Erin was telling me that she went out to look for a single bedroom for a key employee that they were willing to pay for. And which is, to me, I have a whole nother opinion about employers providing housing, especially small business employers, because I'm not sure if that's the best solution for that particular problem. But she's off there going to find one, and she found a place in Edgartown, the only one she could take a look at, and the rent was $6,000 a month for a basic studio, and that was what she had. And so, and obviously couldn't go with it. So the impact for her and for Hal and for all of us out here is that at some point you're going to lose some of us. There's no question. Not all of us can survive this. And those of us that do will be doing it at not the peak level, at our peak performance, and not doing the job we want to do. To be honest with you, I have no desire to be a landlord. I am a landlord right now, not my thing. I want to provide great food, entertainment, and a good time, but I'm stuck because just like earlier said, the business model today is if you want to be in business with Marston Vineyard, you better figure out how to become a landlord at the same time.
So something's happening here that's not happening in other places. Laura.
Yeah, I wanted to look back at the chat because there's a couple questions that relate to this that I wanted to bring.
I was going to bring that up. Are you talking about the Airbnb issue?
Yeah, Jack Freakman had raised, asked if the panelists would discuss the Airbnb issue, which David touched on. And he says it seems to have swallowed up a great deal of what could be affordable housing. So it swallowed up a lot of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is, things that smaller rentals, multi-unit homes that might have been a 2-flat that have turned into a single dwelling. So, I don't know if this is I don't think this is the right venue to really take a deep dive into this, but I think as David mentioned, so first off, that the short-term rental revenue is not going to affordable housing. It's going into the town's general funds. So that was a decision that was made by the towns to use that funding. In the meantime, as the amount of Airbnbs on the island rise, which is not isolated to Martha's Vineyard, this is happening all across Massachusetts and all across the country. It's a great business model. It's low investment for a high return. The National Association of Realtors statistics say that 22% of housing inventory in the United States now is owned by investors, that they're not primary residents, they are investors. That number's rising. There's now a platform, and I can't remember the name of it, but you can log on to this platform and you can actually just look all over the United States for a convenient investment property that you can buy and turn into a full-time short-term rental. So it's a business model that's really, really impacting communities, and every community is having to deal with this. It's particularly difficult here because what it's doing is changing the proportion of year-round rentals that we used to have, and that's diminishing, and the amount of short-term rentals is rising. So then you have more people who need a service economy with fewer people in the service economy to work. So it's out of proportion. One of the things that the housing bank would actually do is look at capturing some of those short-term rentals back into the year-round housing market. The funding's flexible enough, unlike traditional affordable housing revenue, where it could be targeted to that. So with a significant revenue stream, we should be actually able to tip that balance back into more of a working balance.
Thank you, Laura.
And then
there was another question from Marshall saying it's one thing to raise money for housing, but without enhanced sewer infrastructure, there will be a logjam. Would the panelists please address the need to develop and pay for the same in tandem?
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. And Marshall, thanks for raising that. So the transfer fee revenue, the way that the state legislation is crafted and the way that our local legislation is crafted, the funds could be used for housing and housing related infrastructure. So for the up island towns that don't actually have sewer at all, that would mean nitrogen reduction systems, also known as AI systems, which when they're used properly, actually reduce nitrogen with the same effectiveness that sewering would. For the down island towns, there are other options that could be provided. Some funding could go to like increasing capacity. It works like a carbon offset. This is so nerdy, I don't want to really explain it so much, but what you can do is actually pay for nitrogen upgrades in the same watershed on other homes that allows you more sewer capacity in the sewer system. So there are a lot of really creative and really effective ways this is being done in other parts of the country. So we know it has to be done here. And, the Oak Bluffs is working on a comprehensive wastewater management plan right now, as Larkin knows. So anything that would be done with affordable housing would obviously have to dovetail with anything that's happening with wastewater.
Thank you, Laura. So David, you wanted to talk about some positive accomplishments by some employers.
Well, I know that, thank you, Laura. I'm Laurel and Laura. I know that you're going to be discussing in-depth solutions and current efforts, needed efforts in a future panel. But I just wanted to note to everything we've heard from Larkin, the chief, and Denise, and I'll just, that there are employers, of course, across the island who have been wrestling with this for quite some time. I think many of you recall when the Harbor View some years ago said that they were setting a goal for themselves to own or manage up to 100 units of housing for their year-round and their summer staff. Pretty laudable. I spoke with Megan Honey earlier this year for two reasons. One, to check on that progress. They are at 125 units and for generally a 150 employee operation year-round and seasonal. So either that they own or that they rent. And at the other end of the spectrum, I personally know some of those mom and pop owners who have done the crazy creative things that Larkin is now doing, finding himself in the landlording business as well. And use of accessory apartments in West Tisbury for their manager, year-round rental for their manager, which helps with the retaining, the good seasonal staff that they bring in. And I recall very well the first meeting. It was an MVC roundtable in the late afternoon where Denise was new to her job. And it was about housing, employee housing. And I was impressed that she was there, and I saw the wheels turning. And at a certain point, it was like, she happened to turn, I happened to make eye contact, and there was this aha moment where, whether her eyes focused in that movie thing or what, it was like click. She got it. I knew she got it. She saw me watching her get it. I was impressed. And to the point of everybody's involvement tonight and across the island, for those people who have been doing this for years, wrestling with the needs of their business, but also their employees. Again, on the human side of it, they take losses and they make efforts that wouldn't be typical of many businesses and business owners elsewhere. And they do it because it makes good sense business-wise, of course, but also because it's the right thing to do. And it's loyalty, both to their employees and to their community. And hats off to them.
A lot of people we've established the fact that we're going to pay for this somehow, some way. And Laura, you've talked really nicely about how the housing bank can alleviate a lot of those things that we are paying for right now in loss of revenue for our businesses and all kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I'm going to kick some of this back to Chief Wirtz too, because he really touched on this really clearly. So there's a high turnover in municipal departments right now. Paying for the training of firefighters, for Department of Public Works employees, for anyone who works in administration, there's a cost associated with training people. And when the municipalities are unable to retain those folks because of housing, they leave, and then more money has to be spent training new people. So there's a cost associated with the lack of housing and the high turnover. That's reflected in our property taxes. So if those expenses continue to rise, our property taxes are going to go up. So the reason we identified the transfer fee as an opportunity is because it doesn't tap property taxes. It's completely separate. It does not touch town revenue. And what it'll actually do is provide some relief for those property taxes, because we have to stop the high turnover in our municipalities of municipal employees. It's costing us a lot of money. Teaching staff too, that comes, paying for the schools comes out of our property taxes. I don't know if everyone saw a letter in the paper recently from the teachers union, but 50% of our teachers are due to retire in the next 10 years. That's an enormous amount of people. If we don't have the positions, if we don't have the people to fill those positions, or if we have young folks coming, working for 2 years and then leaving because they can't find housing, that is going to be reflected in our property taxes. That's a lot of turnover, a lot of training. So I'll stop there and ask, maybe Chief Wirtz wants to weigh in a little bit on that.
You're muted. You're muted.
Yep. You would think we would know how to do this right after all these years. Yeah, right off the bat, just to a brand new recruit cost me $15,000, and to train and supply them with basic PPE. And in addition to that, we tried to provide incentives like the hospital, educational incentives. We've put people through paramedic school, we put people through EMT school, and but yet we can't guarantee, number one, we can't guarantee that they can get housing. So, and we can't guarantee that they're going to stay. And so we do, as a municipality, we do spend an awful lot of money training and equipping people who have no obligation to stay, and certainly economically it's very difficult for them to stay.
And then the other part of that too, Laurel, to piggyback on that is, like David mentioned, when people leave the island, they take their volunteer hours with them. And I don't know if everybody realizes how much this community runs on volunteer hours. I mean, in a small town, in any rural area, it's like that. It's really extraordinary here. I mean, a lot of our, our firefighters, we have volunteer fire departments. So if we have people who are coming here to work and then going off island because they're commuting here, they're not volunteering for our fire department. They're not volunteering at the food pantry. They're not volunteering for Meals on Wheels. So many of these local services that require volunteers. The more volunteers we lose, the more we have to professionalize those services. And again, that comes out of our property taxes.
Wow, just all of these things collectively pouring over us tonight have really brought the urgency to the forefront. And so if there's anybody out there wondering about why a housing bank, I guess, because this has been going on, historically speaking, for many, many years now. I mean, at least 17 to 20 years, there's been a lot of things happening out there. So again, as you said, David, we're over the tipping point, we're past the tipping point. So if people are wondering what else besides a housing bank can help us at this point, how would you answer that?
Who's that question for, David or?
Anybody who could answer that, really. I mean, Laura, you're from the housing bank, but Denise.
I think David said the magic words. I think it's political will. There's plenty of money, there's funding, there's grants, there's people willing to donate. But we have a density issue. We have to deal with, are we willing and able to put, multi-housing facilities in different areas that are tasteful for the vineyard, and, get things done more quickly. Look at the zoning laws. I mean, there's a lot of very smart people on our island. We talk about, wastewater issues and land density and all of that. We can figure this out. If we have the will to do it, we can do it, but we need that will.
Agreed. And I think to speak to Larkin's point earlier, he raised it a little bit earlier, but I think we need to be careful about how much we rely on employer housing. This panel is specifically about, the economics of running a business or municipal services. There's drawbacks to leaning too heavy on employer housing. And we need to create other housing alternatives. When you're providing housing, this is not about subsidizing a private business. And I've heard that comment from people. Those are people who go out into the community and they volunteer for the fire department and they run the Meals on Wheels programs. They have lives and they bring things to our community outside of their work hours. So this is not just about creating a workforce for our business. And Larkin, can you speak a little bit to the drawbacks of over-reliance on employee housing too? Yeah, you about people being able to, take another job.
It's a good point. And what worries me about that is that, at my core, I'm a free market capitalist. Okay. But the truth is that also holds true for my staff, that they need the freedom to move around. And if someone comes to work for me and takes one of the two, I have two now, hopefully we'll have more places to house someone, and they find a better opportunity down the street, right? But to take that opportunity, they've got to come to Larkin and say, you know what? I got to go in. I got to say, well, I got to put somebody else in your house. And so they're tied to me. And this has been the case. I've seen this actually. I've seen this in actuality with folks who wanted to come to work for me that had their housing supplied by someone else. It's it's not a good model for the employee. It's not a good model for the humans that do the work on this island, because what it does is it fetters them. It chains them to one spot. It's the old, own their soil to the company store type thing, which for me is not a good model. It's not. I think having some freedom to move around gives us a better, healthier workforce. It gives us a more vibrant workforce. And in the end, I think it's been mentioned so many times already, it adds to our community. These folks are our community. These are our neighbors. These are the folks that make the fabric of this island that we love so dear.
Well, thank you, everybody, for this wonderful conversation. I think we've really established the impact on our island economy and businesses and situations, and that if we didn't have our people here, our teachers and our guidance counselors and our therapists and our nurses and doctors and our business owners here, this would be a very, very different place to live. And though we're coming to a close from tonight's panel, and there may still be a lot more questions you have, and these questions can be addressed offline through the CCMVHB. Laura and Julie would be more than happy to answer as many questions as they can. If you have other questions, you can email them to the radio station, and we can make sure we connect you with the right person. Jess has been putting in the chat different email addresses that you might want to write down. There's always more questions and more discussion we could have, and there were things we didn't get to tonight, but the hope is that we're all prepared to work together somehow, some way, as active participants in determining our own future here on MV, and it's really exciting that so many people came tonight, and I really hope that next week you can join us for the third in the series, where we're going to address the impact of housing on elders and our youth, which is enormous as well. So if nobody else has any final words that they would like to share before we close the panel, I'll just survey everybody. Does anybody have anything else you'd like to say? Or Laura?
I do. I just want to echo something that was put in the chat, which is, I see change zoning laws, get involved, vote. This is the vibrancy of a small community. Like what Denise said, is that the housing bank is not going to solely solve this problem. We have to look at our zoning. We have to look at a lot of different components. And the more people get engaged, the more opportunity we have to actually tackle all this stuff at the same time. So please look at the open positions on community boards, on town committees, run for office, volunteer for a committee. And if you want to make change happen, it's got to come from all different angles. And hopefully we can all work together on this.
Well said, Laura. And just to piggyback on what you're saying, there's an opportunity this Wednesday for you to attend another panel, a public educational forum the Legal Women Voters is hosting with the CCMVHB, that they're going to go over exactly what is going to be on the warrant in the spring. So what time is that at, Laura?
That's at 6:30 on Wednesday. It's a Zoom forum hosted by the League of Women Voters, and the Zoom link is going to be on ccmvhb.org. And if the League of Women Voters is able to update their website, it'll also be on leagueofwomenvotersmv.org.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to this wonderful panel. Each of you just gave us so much to think about tonight, and really, really appreciate each and every one of you. So thanks so much. And I hope you go into your night feeling a little bit more informed. Thanks I'm Laurel Reddington on behalf of nonprofit listener supported MVY Radio. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Laurel.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laurel.